Now, Coach?
Doctor, is that working? Is it working? It's working. Okay, thanks everybody for contributing for the cake for Roger, which is we're going to do it on the 13th because his birthday's the 17th, and then it's Passover. So we'll do it the Saturday 13th, and Candy's getting the cake. So everybody's put in $1, which has covered it, and if you haven't, give me $1 before then. So that's it.
Good job doing it this way. And if you have a strong opinion about chocolate or white, please let us know, because we can't get both. We can't get both. They won't do it. Costco won't do it. It's got to be all chocolate cake and chocolate frosting, or white cake and white frosting. And we're mixed, divided about this.
Sweaty day in the kitchen for me. Morning. Good morning. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I did, I really did. The one plane I was on, maybe this is a common place for flying.
Yeah, I know. Florida, popular run. Oh, you want to get it all? Yeah.
You got it, it's true. Good morning. Thank you for your lovely note. Oh, good. He was great, too. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So nice to see everybody. Several things at the beginning. First of all, welcome to live streamers. I often forget about live streamers. And in that regard, Jackie, who is one of the victims of the live streaming mission that comes from me, I don't repeat the questions. And I know I should repeat the questions and the responses, but I get so caught up in the conversation that I forget to do it. So Jackie made this for me. Laminated, big bold type. I'm putting it right here. So that ought to take care of that. Okay. I will be repeating the questions, or at least restating them. Okay, and thank you for participation in the Bagels Enterprise. The bagels this morning are sponsored by the Torah Study Fund. When nobody signs up for it, the Torah Study Fund takes care of it. And fortunately, and thanks to all of you and others, the Torah Study Fund is fairly healthy. So in the rare instance that nobody has signed up for sponsoring bagels, the Torah Study Fund takes care of it. Live stream, thanks to Eric Shaw. Eric, thank you so very much. Appreciate your participation, but also great to know that you're tuning in. And pick up by Carol Marshall. Thank you for that. Several of you, those in poetry, know about Steve and Meg Blake, my old friend from college days. They, from Minneapolis in the winter and from Key West in the summer, participate in our weekly poetry group. And as many of you know, Steve had a very, very bad accident 10, 12 days ago, a bicycle accident. He was flighted to a Miami hospital. I went down there this week and spent 3 days with him and with Meg. I don't think he's doing very well. He's still on a respirator after all of these days. And I was just telling Cindy that Meg said to me that if they didn't wean him from the respirator by tomorrow, that they would have to do a tracheotomy, which is just another step. He did recognize me the first day. He opened one eye. I'm not sure he really saw me the second day. He could see a little bit better. I did ask him on the second day, would you like me to read some poetry to you? And I hate to say it this way, but he was a captive audience. What could he say? So, but he nodded ever so faintly, but to me, emphatically, yes. So I read him 4 poems. I'm sorry? I'm going to tell you what I read. First of all, I read his favorite poem first, which is William Butler Yeats's The Circus Animal's Desertion. If you don't know this poem, I suggest you get to it. It's a reasonably long poem, and it's mysterious in the first, I would say, 3/4 of the poem. Those first 3/4 are very relevant, but it's hard to know what he's driving at. But the last couple of stanzas are astonishing. Very, very well. It's about aging. And the circus animals were the subjects of his earlier poems, he says. And though he dealt with the circus animals, he never got to the foundation or to the base. What is it that animates our lives? What are the deeper sources? And so the circus animals have deserted him, so to speak, in his older age, and he wants to try to get to foundations. The second poem I read to him was Wallace Stevens' The Snowman. If you don't know The Snowman, rush to it. The last couple of lines are something like, for listeners who listen in the snow, for listeners who nothing themselves listen in the snow, to the nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. Now that's a puzzling ending, but quite remarkable, actually. The third poem I read, and I'm going to read it to you now, is another Yeats poem, Leda and the Swan. How many know Leda and the Swan? Yes. Camellia Paglia, one of the great critics of the 20th century, said she thinks this is the greatest poem of the 20th century. Yeah, hard to say that. And the last poem was Keats' Ode to Autumn. So those are 4 great poems. And after I read each poem, I said to him, leaning over his bed, his eyes are closed, he's got a respirator, he's all bandaged up, would you like me to read another poem? And he went like this. I took that as a yes. So each time I asked him, so it was really a great experience. Let me read the poem to you. Leda and the Swan. So you know the story out of Greek mythology that Leda, who I believe was a queen of Sparta, was seduced or raped by the god Zeus, who had the capacity to transform himself into a variety of other things so that he would be disguised. And here he comes to her as a swan, seduces and or rapes her. From that union comes Helen of Troy, and Leda also gives birth to Agamemnon's queen, Clytemnestra. And these are two important people in the whole story of the Trojan War. And what this poem is about, if I can dare to say it, is the ubiquity, the commonplace event of war, and how violence is not only a feature of war, but really the foundation of war, our proclivity to violence. After all, Zeus rapes Leda, from which come two of the protagonists of the war, Helen of Troy and her stepsister, half-sister, Clytemnestra. The poem is a sonnet. Many of you know that a sonnet has 16 lines. Gerard Manley Hopkins reduces it to 10 and a half, I think. So it's a commonplace, but not necessarily universal. There are two kinds of psalm. This is what's called a Petrarchan psalm, which is 8 lines and then 6 lines into 2 parts. And the 6-line unit starts with what's known as a volta, a turn. What Yeats has done here is he maintains the 14-line structure, but he breaks one of the lines into 2. So he could have written both like this, but he writes it like this. So the broken line, if you count lines literally, has 15 lines and not 14. So the brokenness of civilization, which is the subject of the poem, is represented structurally by the brokenness of the sonnet form. You see what a great poet can do, both in the structure and the content, the idea, I don't want to say message. So here's the poem. And by the way, my criterion for an astonishing poem is that I can't read it without shuddering. It just gets so deep that you have a physical reaction to it. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed by the dark webs, her nape caught in his bill. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified, vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? How can body, laid in that white rush, but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? Gosh. So, it's just about that event. And then he brings in the broken wall. All of a sudden, the broken wall, the walls of Troy. And Agamemnon, who after all went to war with his brother Menelaus. You may remember when he's getting ready to sail off, there are no winds. And so he has to appease the goddess of the winds by a sacrifice. And he sacrifices his and Clytemnestra's daughter, Iphigenia, which Clytemnestra does not take too well. And when Agamemnon returns home, he is killed in his bathtub by Clytemnestra and her paramour, Aegisthus. By the way, just to go on with this a little bit, Richard Strauss's opera Elektra, some of you may know, is a depiction of this gory tale. If you don't know Elektra, listen to it, spend some time with it. It takes a while. It's a hard opera, but it's extraordinarily powerful. The broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. Then he breaks the line. Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? The indifference of the gods to what happens. The indifferent beak could let her drop. Did she put on his knowledge? Zeus knows what all this life stuff is about, along with his power, and so on. It's quite a wonderful poem. Okay, so turning now to Torah. Let's continue with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments and joining upon us to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. I want to just begin with a short paragraph from Marilyn Robinson's new book, Reading Genesis, which I'm now reading. I don't love the book, but it's so far, it's provocative. And here's how she opens. The Bible is a theodicy. Now, theodicy comes from the Greek that means the justice of God. Okay? So a theodicy is an attempt to justify the ways of God to human beings, which is how Milton understands Paradise Lost, a justification of God. The Bible is a theodicy, a meditation on the problem of evil. This being true, it must take account of things as they are. It must acknowledge in a meaningful way the darkest aspects of the reality we experience, and it must reconcile them with the goodness of God and of being itself, against which this darkness stands out so sharply. That is to say, the Bible is a work of theology, not simply a primary text upon which theology is based. Now, I love that. So to me, the key words here are meditation and theology. So what she is saying is that the Bible, in some important way, is philosophical. That is, it's an attempt to get to the bottom of what animates reality, the human condition, our environment in the world, in the universe, so that the Bible is thinking hard about these questions, and therefore isn't just a primary text as a basis of theology. Somebody is taking these stories and making a theology out of it. It is already a theology, already a deep meditation on these issues. I like that very, very much. And that's what we work on here in Torah Study, I think, what the deeper meanings of the biblical stories and the narratives and the individuals, what does it mean? And it's a bottomless well, isn't it? We keep coming back to these same stories, these same subjects. It's great to return to old friends, but those friends retain their mystery, and we have to try again to get further into understanding, for which there is really no end to the matter. Thank goodness. Just like all great art, and I dare to say the Bible is a masterpiece of literary art, it's bottomless. If you look at the late self-portraits of Rembrandt and try to figure out what he's up to, you just can't get to the bottom of it. The guy is so deep. There's a picture that I recently saw, I think it's by Caravaggio, actually, or maybe it's Rembrandt, The Return of the Prodigal Son. I think it may be Rembrandt. And it is Take a look at it, The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And you look at it and try to figure out what's going on there, and you can go on and on with an attempt to get to the bottom of it. And that's great art. Okay, so what we're doing now is biblical leadership. And last week we began to look at Moses, which we'll continue doing. So let's turn to Exodus chapter 3. So God comes to Moses out of the burning bush. Verse 3, let's just quickly review it, starting verse 1. Now Moses tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and we saw, or indicated last week, that two great figures in the biblical literature are shepherds, Moses and David. Moses, the first and greatest of the prophets, David, the first great king. There is Saul. And so both of these leadership roles are headed by two shepherds. And we know, of course, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it strikes me that that is not incidental or accidental, that the biblical author is trying to tell us that a great leader has the attributes of a shepherd. Caring for the flock, worried about the strays and the dangers, feeding them as they feed him, and so on. One could talk at great length about the roles of a shepherd. He drove the flock, still in verse 1, into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there a bush was all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? And we pointed out last week that one of Moses' attributes is curiosity. He doesn't just see the phenomenon and go on. He pauses to ask, what is it all about? And verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, so not only do we see that curiosity is a quality of leadership, God does too. God recognizes that Moses pauses, and God too takes note of this. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he answered, here I am. And we talked about this last week, this hineni, I am present, here I stand, I'm ready. Hineni means both presence and readiness, anticipation, waiting for the next thing. And he said, do not come closer, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. So Moses here is having what we might call an epiphany, a kind of revelation, and either the ground is inherently holy or it becomes holy when God's presence is made manifest. It may be the act that produces the holiness of the place, or the place might already be holy. And I think the Bible features both. There is Beit El, Bethel, which is already holy, but when Jacob comes to it, it takes on a different narrative than the narrative had hitherto assumed. And he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of I am, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When you think about it, this is quite astonishing, because we know that the Israelites were in Egypt for half a millennium, 400 years. So the question arises, how did they maintain their identity as a people ready to be called out of Egypt? And one of the things on which we could speculate is this very phrase, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. In some way, the lore, the history of the Genesis episodes was carried forth and remained a story recognizable by the people 400 years later. Otherwise, this would be nonsense, right? And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So Moses has a kind of reverence for the holy and recognizes that in the presence of holiness, there is something overwhelming. And maybe it's danger. Take off your shoes because you are on holy ground. And so we see in Moses already curiosity, the ability to look again, that God is going to appoint him as leader, and he comes now to feel some skepticism. So that's part one, the first part of the Moses story. And the Lord, verse 7, continued, I've marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, the sense that the people is still a kind of coherent whole, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I'm mindful of their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Let's go back just for a second to chapter 2, the last two verses of chapter 2, just to fill in a blank here a little bit. A long time after that, you see where I am? Verse 23. The king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from bondage rose up to God, and God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. This is where God comes out of his, let's call it, absence from the narrative. And the moment of emerging from that absence is that God hears the suffering of God's people. Okay? So God emerges in a crisis. Okay, so now let's go back to chapter 3, verse 11. But Moses said to God, and this is the first of Moses' expressions of reluctance. And so what I think is paramount here is the humility of the one called to be a prophet. I'm not up to it. And we can well understand why not. And we'll look at a few other passages soon. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? So who am I to be the one chosen for this daunting task? And God said, notice God didn't say to him, well, you have the following 8 attributes. No, God seems to acknowledge Moses's, what's the word here, inadequacy. And by inadequacy, I think I mean the inadequacy of anybody, or at least the felt inadequacy, to perform this daunting task. Okay? So we want to take note of the fact that Moses recognizes his littleness, or the littlest of anybody trying to take on this role. And so God's response was, verse 12, I will be with you. Okay? So God says this to the people from time to time, even though you anger me with some interruption or some doubt, I'm going to stay with you. Okay? Think about the Babylonian exile, the defeat of the Israelites by Nebuchadnezzar, essentially 586 before the Common Era, 700 years after Moses, when it might appear to the people that God has abandoned them, that the Babylonians have defeated the Israelites, and the Babylonian god Marduk has defeated the Israelite god Yahweh Adonai, and that the story is over. But what the prophet, especially Ezekiel, says is that the story does continue, and it's the story of covenant. It's not only the terrestrial story, it's the covenant story between God and the people, even in exile. So that at moments throughout the history when it might be natural to infer the covenant is over and God has abandoned the people, and God gets plenty angry in the book of Kings, as we've noticed in the past, God stays, this is how I like to put it, God stays with the project. Marilyn Robinson, by the way, and this is one of the things I resist in this book, but I haven't read too far to know for sure, is that she thinks the project has a goal, and that the Bible has what we might call a teleology, a purpose. This strikes me as, again, perhaps unfairly at this early stage in my reading of the book, as a Christian overlay onto the Bible, that when you think of the Christian name for the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, if I say I'm wearing my old tie today, you know one more thing about me. I have a new tie. I have a newer tie. So to call a book the Old Testament is to suggest that there is a New Testament coming, which for much of Christian theology is the culmination and climax, the net outcome of the Old Testament. Okay? And I think that when Robinson says there is a goal in the book, I don't know exactly what she means yet, but I infer she means this idea from some Christian theology. Okay? Look, I mean, I want to say two things about that. First of all, anybody has a right to interpret a book in his or her own way. And if early Christians and the continuing Christian community decides to read the Hebrew Scriptures this way, far be it from me to say you can't do it, because a book is public and therefore can be interpreted. We can resist that interpretation. We can say it's not for us, but we can't say that it's wrong, especially because one of the chief activities of the rabbis, the successors of biblical religion, is midrash, is interpreting the Bible. So, for example, the rabbis interpret the story of Jacob and Esau as a foreshadowing of the rivalry between the Jewish people and Rome. Esau is the ancestor of Rome, and therefore that struggle in the Bible is an anticipation of the struggle between Israel, the Jewish people, and the vast Roman Empire. So look, one has as much right to say that that interpretation is valid or has power as to say the reading of the Old Testament as Old Testament has power. The problem with that reading, as we know, is it's what we might call its supersessionist overlay. Supersession means we have now taken over the place that you had. We supersede you. So one danger is to say that the function of the Old Testament or the ancient Israelites is to pave the way for the revelation of Jesus as the Christ. And once that revelation comes, we have now become, and this is what St. Paul says in the letters, we have become now the true Israel. And if early Christians have become the true Israel, what happens to the old Israel? It should at least go out of business. If we have a better version of what you guys have been after, why would you continue? I mean, let me give you a banal example. I've had my cell phone now for 3 or 4 years. Isn't it time for me to get a better one? Why am I holding out with the old one when the better one has so many more things for me to have to make it a better tool for me? So the danger of calling the Hebrew Scriptures the Old Testament is its supersessionist implication. And once the Jews no longer have any reason for being, because the reason for being was to pave the way for the true Israel, why don't you Jews go out of business? Why do you hang on to Judaism? You've got the wrong idea here, and we know better what's better for you, and that is to come and embrace the true revelation, the true climax and culmination. If you don't, maybe we have an obligation to save your soul. And so we're going to try to convert you. And if you're recalcitrant, we're going to have to kill you. I'm sorry. And by the way, the reason for my going into this a bit is much of the contemporary Christianities have given up the supersessionist idea and have said, Vatican II said this quite emphatically, that the Jews remain in active covenant with God, and therefore that Judaism remains valid for Jews, and Christianity remains valid for Christians. Of course, the whole notion of the Christian mission to transform the world into Christianity, the greatest of religions. I think it's Karl Barth. You know Karl Barth, great Protestant theologian, in his Church Dogmatics, makes a distinction between Christianity and religion. That there are the religions, it's true, but there's only one true way, and that's Christianity. And don't see Christianity as just another religion. So Barth, I think, if I'm not misquoting him, maintains this supersessionist idea. He was one of the great theologians of the 20th century. How did I get this far afield? Okay, so I guess we're talking about ways of reading Scripture, and then Marilyn Robinson's notion here, which I'm interested to pursue. So we're back here to verse 11. I can't remember what got me started on it. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt?" He said, "I will be with you. That shall be your sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain." So Moses had already been to Mount Sinai here. And in verse 1 of this chapter, we have the word Chorev, which is another name for Mount Sinai. Okay. So, all right, Moses says in his first attempt at expressing reluctance, "Who am I?" And essentially God says to him, it doesn't matter, because I have chosen you and I will endow you with the necessary charisma. And charisma comes from the Greek word charism, which means a gift. I have given you the gift of prophecy. You didn't have to go to college to get your prophecy degree and so on. Actually, later on, Amos says when he's assaulted, "I am not a prophet nor the son of a prophet," by which he means I'm not one of the member of a prophetic school that teaches itself. I am getting my bona fides from God and not from any training, okay? So God's response is, "I will be with you. Don't worry, you may be inadequate, but I'm going to trail you." Verse 13, Moses said to God, "When I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' These are all really great questions of Moses, aren't they? His reluctance is grounded in a profound understanding of what he's been asked to undertake. A very huge mission to lead a people out of exile against one of the world's great powers at that time. And so Moses says, I'm not up to it. Who am I? And God responds. And then he says, but who shall I tell the people is sending me? Is this an authentic call or is it an inauthentic call? And I imagine Moses might have said, I don't think we see any evidence, did I call myself? Did I wake up one morning and say, man, I'm destined for greatness. Why am I just hanging out here? So is the what's the word here? The commission to this office authentic? And the implication is the only authentic caller is God. So Moses said, back to verse 13, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? There's a particular notion of what a name is. And we can think about the difference between essence and accident. That my parents called me Roger is an accident. I could have been William, right? It would still be me. So the connection between me and my name is totally accidental. There's another view of names in which the name reveals the essence of the person, okay? An essentialist. So that when I have a name tag at a convention and it says Roger, we know this guy is a Roger. Whatever the attributes of Rogerness happen to be. And Rogerness is extremely different from Stuartness, right? Or Arthurness. That would be an essentialist view. So what Moses is asking is, not what do people call you, but who are you? What is the name that tells us your essence? What shall I say to them? Verse 14, and God said to Moses, and here God is supremely clever. In other words, he has to give Moses something, but if the name captures the essence, he can't give it all away. Otherwise, Moses will have him captured. You are the X, that's what your name is, and the X acts in this way. And God needs to both convey something to Moses, which he will need, and also maintain, let's face it, God's freedom. If name is essence and we know the name, then we know what this person is and how this person will act, and this person ceases to be free. So God needs to maintain his freedom, or a theological way of putting it is God's transcendence, God's otherness. But, you know, the God of the philosophers, we might say, is wholly other, right? Too distant for us. An ultimate point in a philosophical system, but remote from us. That's what God is, so let's say to Aristotle. But though the God of the Bible, let's call it the God of religion, has to be other, I mean, we don't need another friend. If God is just totally with us, God is superfluous. So God has to be other, but it's an otherness that also has to be present, because the God of religion enters the lives of people and enters the historical process from afar. So God has a very tricky matter on God's hands here to reveal something without giving it all away, which is not just a matter of trying to maintain a secret, but trying to maintain the godness of God. You see God's challenge here? And God is ready to respond. So I'm going back to verse 13. So Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So Ehyeh is the future, or we might say the incomplete form of a verb, from the verb hayah, which is the state of being, to be, lihiot, hayah. So, what God is saying is, I will be what I will be. And what can we make of that? It's often translated, how is it translated here? And yeah, sure, he says, thus you shall say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. And so on. So it looks like there's no translation. In other words, the name Ehyeh is I will be. I will be sent me to you. In a sense, this verb form is not just future. It represents incompleted action. Okay? So it's not that God is I will be, but not now. I am now, but who I am is open to the future. In other words, I'm giving you something. I'm giving you a name. I stand for being. That can be also revocalized, the consonants, as I will make be. I will make what I will make. I will cause being to be. So you can see that a lot can be derived from this. I am future. You can't predict what I will be. I am free to do in the future what I claim to do in the future, but I'm also with you now. And perhaps I'm not only being per se, but I'm the cause of being, which adds another layer to it. So I think this is an extremely clever response by the use of the state of being verb here. God gives but withholds. Ehyeh sent me to you. And God said further to Moses, thus you shall speak to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Okay? That will not make sense to the people unless they know who Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are. And they can only know it if the stories of the people have been told down through the generations for 400 years. Okay? So, once again, I don't want to overstate these things, but the author is up to something extremely powerful here. Something about how a people stays together under duress and without frequent revelation from the source, which is implied here when God hasn't spoken since before the Joseph story. And we get a sense of how they were able to do it, just one part of it, and also the authenticity or the meaning of the one who sends Moses. I'm the one who created the world and who represents what it means to be. Ron.
How do we get from Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh to Adonai?
To Adonai, yeah. Well, Adonai comes from Yud He Vav He. Well, that's right. So in other words, there is a disinclination to pronounce the name of God. And so Yahweh or Yahweh or Yehovah is a result of what we call vocalizing the consonantal text. Think of it. Yud with a shva, silent. Ho, Yud He, Ho, Va. Yehovah, the vav now with a vowel, or Jehovah, is a rendering of that four-consonant name. Oftentimes when we write it, we either write Yud-Hey dash Vav-Hey. I tend to write in English G-D. Cantor Sibo writes GD, out of a disinclination to write that name as if to say, I can now control something about God. And for me to write G-D reminds me every time I wrote it that I'm dealing with a unique factor in the universe. And it's not just an ordinary name. So instead of saying Yahweh, we say Adonai, which is built on a different set of consonants, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, Adonai, which can mean sir, sirs, or God. But that's the rendering of Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Was that your question, Ron?
I think so.
Nice answer to the wrong question. Did you want to clarify your question?
Well, the reason that I am eventually confused, but today I'm confused at this point, is that structurally, this passage reads, the Lord God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, this shall be my name forever.
Uh-huh.
Is he referring to is the author referring to Asher,
Yeah.
Asher,
I-
or is he referring to,
I would, yes.
I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's my name.
Very nice. Excellent. Excellent. Look, this gets into an interesting philosophical question. So there's a difference between a proper name and a definite description. Take Venus. Venus is the proper name of that planet, but we also call it the morning star. That's a definite description. The evening star. So we could say that both the name and the definite description are names, right? Let's see now. Take just a name at random here. Bill Skowron, Yankees first baseman, who is known as Moose Skowron. So he has two names, Bill Skowron and the Moose. They both refer to Bill Skowron, okay? So Cookie Lavagetto, his mother didn't name him Cookie. So I think Ron's got a good point. There are proper names and there are definite descriptions. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob refers to only one entity, and that is God. And therefore, it's a definite description. So I think you're making a good point. This is my name forever can be given two renderings. I like it. Maya.
Just to go into the name, I think that Jews don't say Yehovah or whatever because you don't want to capture the essence. But to go back to the name, Yud Hey Vav Hey. So if you parse it, Haya, he was.
Yes.
Hove, he is. Ihyeh is he will be. So that's.
Yes, the three tenses, past, present, and future. Yeah. I don't think Hoveh is a biblical rendering, but it's certainly rabbinic, right? The participle. Yeah. But that's good. So each of the temporal cases, past, present, and future, can be rendered from that root, was, is, and will be. Another part of the power of it. Or as we might say, God is the God of in time, and therefore in history. So it indicates that God is not just a theological entity, but an active force in history from this name. Jim?
Well, if we're looking at the mystery of how the chapter 2, a long time after that, the king of Egypt died, the Israelites were growing under bondage. The Egyptians helped us stay together.
Okay.
By keeping us as the other. We were their free labor. There was no desire for them to cause us to assimilate. Just as it is now. We're an easy punching bag. We have been, I'm going to guess we will be, and we're in the midst of a serious punching bag right now. And it's to the rest of the religions or it's to the rest of the world's benefit to keep us there. And they have, and they do a good job. They've helped us stay together in a very negative way, but nonetheless, here we are.
Yeah. So, restate the questions. I forgot to restate Ron's. Is, this is my name forever, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, one of God's names? And the answer I attempted was, yes, there are two kinds of name, a label and a definite description. So Jim raises a really interesting question, and that is, what are the sources of the continuity of a people? And we could say there are two of them, internal and external. The ones we make for ourselves, that's I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, one can infer that that story had been passed down for 400 years. The rabbis also say there are other factors. The Israelites in Egypt gave their children Hebrew names, and they circumcised their children, their boys. And we see some evidence for that in chapter 4, where God is about to cause some harm to Moses and Zipporah, and she has to circumcise somebody. That's a sense that circumcision was still part of the law. So that's the internal set of factors. One overt, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is right there, that they named their children Hebrew names and so on, is inferred. After the names Moses and Aaron and Phineas, Pinchas, are all Egyptian names. They're not indigenous to Hebrew. So Jim raises the question of, what is the role of outsiders, anti-Semites, in maintaining our coherence as a people? You know, the great founder of political Zionism, not of Zionism per se, the earliest expression of Zionism is in the Bible, right? I'm going to give you a land of milk and honey, and this will be your land forever, and so on and so on. So Zionism has its beginning right with Abraham. Go to the land that I will show you, okay, and so on. Herzl said that we Jews are no longer a coherent people. We become coherent through the anti-Semitism of our enemies. We are one because our enemies has insisted we are one. And therefore, Zionism is a call to take the Jews out of anti-Semitic environments into their own land. So Herzl's political Zionism, nationalism, Achad Ha'am, for example, another great Zionist, wasn't interested in political autonomy. He was interested in cultural autonomy. And the reason to go to the land of Israel for Achad Ha'am was so that we could be our own people and not a part of a larger culture, and we can create our own culture as an independent people. Because Achad Ha'am was very skeptical about the possibility of a massive emigration to the land of Israel. But even with a vanguard few, we can create an authentic, modern Jewish Hebrew culture. But for Herzl, the whole impetus is anti-Semitism. So the anti-Semites have made us what we are. That's Jim's point here, and that was what Herzl felt to be the engine that drove Zionism. And you may remember after the Kishinev massacre, the pogroms in, I think, 1903, Herzl looked around for some country to give the Jewish people a place where they could go. And the British evidently offered him, how serious the offer was, how subject to implementation it was, they offered him some place in Eastern Africa known as Uganda. And Herzl went to the Fifth of the Sixth Zionist Congress and made that proposal on the assumption that, yes, Israel is the ideal place for us, but when the house is on fire, you don't first ask where are the people going to go. You get them out of the burning house and take them to a place of refuge. And Uganda was available, at least Herzl thought. I mean, if he had pursued it, you don't know exactly how the British may have come clean with it. But Herzl at that Congress was hounded out of the room. When he gave that address, a subgroup of Zionists bolted from the room and created their own caucus. And they called themselves, this is an interesting move they made, the Zionists. We're the Zionists that will settle only for Zion, for Israel. And Herzl then went to them and quoted Psalm 137, right? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, as if to say, I get the point here, and I'm acknowledging that Jerusalem, now apart for the whole, is the only place for us. But it's an interesting question, to the degree to which, to put it maybe badly, do we depend on our enemies to keep us together? Because the powers, the forces of assimilation are keen, and the large world beckons at its best. Please, tell me your name, please. Robin? Rem. R-E-M.
Yep.
I'm going to try to remember.
No worries. I'm just sitting here as you're talking about the names and reflecting on towards the end of 3 verse 4, the first thing that God says to Moses is his name. And then right before the start of verse 5.
Where are you reading verse 4? Or verse 3? Moses' name.
After Moses says, wow, what a marvelous sight, this burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
And God calls out to him by his name.
Good.
But then Moses' answer to him is not, huh? What? He says, here I am.
Yes.
And so then when Moses says, what is your name? How do I call you?
Yes.
His response is, I am. It's like this.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. That God's response is very similar, if not exactly alike, Moses' response. So let me repeat your question now. So Rem is saying, we're back here to verse 3. So Moses said, I must turn aside and look to the bush, burst burn up. Verse 4. When the Lord saw he turned aside to look, God called out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he answered, here I am. And so your point here is the I am is in his response. And God said, he said, don't come closer. I see what you're saying. And so later on, it's not later on, when Moses says, when people say, now I'm in verse 13, what is his name? And God said, I am what I am. God responds in the same way Moses does. So, here's the first thing that crosses my mind. It may be unfair. I think think the two I ams function in a very different way. What Moses is really saying is more the word here than the I am. He's not saying who he is. I amness. That's what God is saying. I amness. Moses is just saying, he could have just said, here. But that may not quite get it. Here I am. So while God is using that state of being verb to represent existence, necessary existence, Moses isn't using I am in that sense. Does that, okay, very good. But I like very much what you noticed there. I mean, you didn't notice a similarity which has to be responded to, and I've tried. Yeah, very good. What, Ron? You want to respond to it?
At the same point, 3 verse 6,
3 verse 6.
God says, I am, and then there's another sort of what he said, so we know who's speaking.
Yeah.
I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. I am Ron. I am Fred. I am Seth.
Yes.
My name is
Right.
the God of your father, the God of Abraham,
Right.
the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob.
Right.
As he repeats it
Mm-hmm.
in verse 15. Again, he says, I tell them that my name is the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
Right. He's still using the I am. Is that your point there? Yeah. So Ron is pushing Rem's point. I almost said, but I've held back, beyond reasonableness. But I wouldn't. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. I'm just teasing you.
Tacit apology, tacit.
Very good. So Ron is saying, the I am continues in a way, so that the what we might call the ontological point. Ontology is the doctrine of what exists. And you're amplifying Rem's point that the I am seems to have some weight to it. And my response is, in a way, the I am is a place filler. It's a way of getting the sentence started, and it's not itself an assertion. Yeah.
I think that goes along with what I was saying.
Oh, you were saying that. Oh, okay, very good. I take back the beyond reasonableness. Okay, very good. Vivian?
Maybe I missed Ron's point, but I missed, the Hebrew there is hineni, is that correct?
Yes.
The Hebrew, so we have to think of where we've heard hineni before.
Oh, yes.
Which is more, here I am, I'm ready. I'm
That's
open.
it. Yeah.
That's where, unless people have said that, I'm just,
No, it's true. And what point are you making by saying that?
that it is placement, it is not, it is an interesting echo of that, of what's going on in that, but it is not,
A philosophical claim. I'm sorry?
it's not necessarily counterpuntal with God's response. It is an echo of what, Adam's response?
Yeah, yes.
Of where have we seen hineni? It's always an important space.
Right.
In the story.
Yes. You're saying it's not really about existence as much as presence.
Yes.
Right. No, I think.
Which is where you were. same.
Right,
place.
right. The beguiling and potentially confusing element that Rem points out is that on the surface, it looks like it's the same until we ask ourselves, how do these words function? And the I am doesn't function here the way it does when God gives his name. Eddie?
Well, and to, keep on the same point, keep on being the same point, I think that many of the I ams in English are just the way that needs to be said in order to be translated, but it's not the same concept in Hebrew. Take, for example, verse 11, the I am is actually Anochi, which has nothing to do with it with Asher or any of the other points.
Good.
And me has nothing to do with the verb to be in Hebrew as well. So
Right.
it's just the way it's translated that can get into that confusion.
Right, Eddie is just pointing out the confusion of the ways in which the English has to render the Hebrew. And really, I don't think biblical Hebrew has a participle, an I am. We infer it in sentences where there might not be a verb. There's either past or there's either, really, I think the best way of saying it is, completed action and incompleted action are the two verb tenses. Okay, very good. So, good. No, we're reading closely. I like that. Malcolm, and then we're going to push on.
This may be too much of a reach. You used the term, I think, theodicy, in introducing this morning. This short interaction between Moses and God, to me, is an example of defining the relationship of Jews to God and who we are. So this question we struggle with about what is it to be a Jew, I think God answers, you said, 400 years, how are this group of people kept together? They didn't all wear mezuzahs or Jewish stars, and they didn't all look the same. We were not a race. And so Moses asked, and God very clearly says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who I am to these people. So that, to me, fundamentally, it's not because Pharaoh, or at least God is saying, it's not because of Pharaoh, it's not because of the enemy, it's because you are all my Jews, you are all my people.
So Malcolm is saying here, let me put it in the context of Jim's point. What is it that defines who this people is? And we could say at least three different factors. What we ourselves do, how do we celebrate Hanukkah? How do we celebrate Pesach? The customs, the language, all the things that culture is, the art, the music, and so on. That's part one. Part two might be what other people make of us. This is Jim's idea, and therefore we are, in some ways, what other people say we are, and we respond to it. So both of these are what we might call horizontal features, cultural, historical, sociological features. You're pointing to a vertical feature, transcendence. We are connected to the transcendent, not only from time to time, but essentially. That's who we are. And your illustration here is, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am connected to the people who is connected to me. Okay? So, this is illustrated quite provocatively in the story of Jacob, when Jacob is wrestling with this mysterious person. And Jacob says to the person, who are you? He says, no, it doesn't matter who I am. Who you are is the one who struggled with God and with human beings and survived. Yisrael. El is God. So in our very name is our connection to the transcendent. Right. No, I think that's great. How do we identify ourselves as a people? And of course, there are great thinkers and movements that are secular movements. The Biluim, for example, one of the early group of immigrants to Israel. So there were the pogroms after the assassination of Alexander II in 1881, which generated pogroms. And from those pogroms, the early stirrings of Zionism emerged. And one of the first groups, the Jews were always going to Israel, but here they're going to Israel for a new purpose, to try to create an entity. And the entity that went was, I think, a group of 13 or 15 individuals who in 1881 got up and went to the land of Israel. And Bilu is an acronym for Beit Yaakov Lechu V'Nelecha. Beit Yaakov I, Lechu El, V'Nelecha U, Bilu. Okay? This is a quote from the prophet Isaiah, I believe, chapter 2. What's interesting about the name Bilu is they left off the last two words of that quote, which were B'or Adonai, in the light of the Lord. Come, let us get up and go in the light of the Lord. It's not accidental that they left off maybe it wouldn't have made as eloquent what do you call this, an acronym. But I think it was purposeful. They were saying, we're no longer doing this as religious Jews. We're doing this as a kind of vanguard of a people that wants to remake itself as a people and not necessarily as the followers of Jewish law or some imperatives of the God of Israel. So now they failed, but they certainly kind of set a standard for migration, for immigration. So it's just an example of secular Jews who would say that the connection between the people and God is not necessary for a people's flourishing and survival. And there's a lot of secular Jewish movements. I mean, the Bund, the sort of quasi-Marxist group of laborers was a secular group, and so on. Yeah, Jim.
I agree with Malcolm, but to underscore what I was saying before, during these 400 years that nobody seems to know much about, there wasn't any desire on the Egyptians' part to assimilate these people. They wanted to keep them in the corner. And now, right now, and also World War II, there wasn't any attempt by our enemies to assimilate us. They want to annihilate us. They still do. So they're keeping us in this corner. So we're in this corner. What do we do all day? We do what Jews do. I mean, you can't just stand there and look at the wall all day. So we keep our traditions going. We're not particularly invited, well, maybe in some cases invited to assimilate to these other cultures, but all our scripture, everything here says, don't let your daughters marry foreign people, don't let your sons marry foreign. There's every inclination in the world here to stay separate, and their enemies are happy to keep us that way.
Well, pretty strong statement. And Jim's point is that this separation between Jews and non-Jews is certainly asserted over and over again by non-Jews, and by maybe independently or by way of reaction by Jews ourselves to resist assimilation. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard, in a certain way, it's hard to argue with that. On the other hand, what kind of case could be made that we Jews have flourished in two cultures in America now? You know, we're in an especially difficult point in our history. I don't know that we ought to universalize that idea. Jews have flourished as members of the larger society in so many different ways, in the professions, at the university, economically. That doesn't mean there isn't enduring anti-Semitism. You know, there is a Harvard sociologist, I can't remember his name, who makes the point that I don't care what people think of me as long as they're decent to me in the market square. You know, as long as we get along functionally, what do I care what they think? And of course, what we think, what a person thinks, is likely to burst out into the open in terms of how they act. So it's not a matter of no consequence at all. But, I mean, one of the ways in which a pluralist society can work, if it does, that's a big if, is if people recognize difference and are willing to accept difference. And we each plow our own garden, plus the gardens we cultivate in common. They're both. So, to me, Jim, you've overstated the point, but there's certainly a lot of power in what you're saying. And we do experience it today. Ellen.
It seems to me that once you're in a ghetto, you're forced to be whatever they choose you to be.
Whatever they, what?
Like, put all the Jews in the ghetto, put all the Jews in Egypt, in a certain place, that they weren't allowed to mingle with the other population.
Right.
That's not true today. Jews have spread themselves out all over the world, and certainly in the United States, even in Cleveland. But we are still vulnerable.
Yeah.
But the participation in the temple, in the Jewish life, has probably faded with assimilation.
It's probably what? With
Faded with assimilation.
F-A-T-E-D?
Faded.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Oh, faded. I see what you're saying. Uh-huh.
Not ghettoized anymore. And,
Right.
And we're not, we still are persecuted. And we still, those of us who go to temple are vulnerable because they can identify us in that place. But it's not the same today
As?
as ghettoized.
Okay, very good. So Ellen is making the point that, yeah, there are these prejudices and so on, but really we're part of a larger society and do Jewish things together. Certainly assimilation is a force. I like Ahad Ha'am's distinction between slavish imitation and competitive imitation. That to imitate some of the ways of others, to look out over our borders, so to speak, and see what non-Jews are doing, we can imitate them in two different ways. We can envy what the non-Jews do so much that we leap over our barriers and become them. That's slavish imitation. We like what they are. We don't like so much what we are. We want to be like them. We assimilate. Slavish imitation leads to assimilation. Competitive imitation is we look out over our boundaries and see some very interesting phenomena, and we would like to embrace those phenomena too, but to bring them back into our community to enliven and enrich our community. That's competitive imitation. A good example of that is Hebrew poetry in the Golden Age of Spain. So between the biblical psalmist, let's put the year 500 before the Common Era, to really the Golden Age of Spain, 900 to 1100 of the Common Era, 1400 years, the only poetry written in Hebrew were the liturgical prayers, piyutim, that feature in the prayer book, religious poetry. It's only in the Golden Age of Spain that poets like Shmuel HaNasi and Yehuda Halevi and Moses Ibn Ezra began to write poetry in Hebrew that was not, strictly speaking, some of it was religious. Yehuda Halevi's was often very Zionistic. That was an example of competitive imitation. We see great poetry being written by Spaniards, by Muslims, and we feel we can write great poetry too. The impulse to do so was not indigenous. We saw it being done in the larger culture. Rather than become Muslims, we feel dignified, we feel dignity about our own tradition, and we can do that too. So the rise of Hebrew poetry, again, was a result of competitive imitation. In other words, looking out with approval and appreciation at what non-Jewish society is doing can yield something very beneficial for us, or it can yield assimilation, right? Think about Zionism. Zionism itself is a product, to a large degree, of 19th century European nationalism, right? The creation of Italy as a nation state, the creation of Germany as a nation state. Hey, we can do that too. There's also, what do we call this? Peasantry is the wrong way to do it, but farming as a way of life. You know what? We can do this too. Let's go to the land of Israel and not just create a state, that's one view, not just create Jewish high culture, but low culture. Let's go and be farmers, because we won't possess a land until we get the soil under our fingernails. The heck with poetry and philosophy. If you want the Jews really to come to possess the land of Israel, you have to work the land of Israel. I call this mysticism from below. There's a mysticism from above, some intimacy with God. Intimacy, mysticism. Mysticism from below is intimacy with the soil. The land of Israel is special ontologically. It's a different kind of soil. In what sense? It's made for Jews. That's where we belong. So this is a Jewish importation of European agrarianism back to the land. So these are ways in which being involved in the larger society can be extremely productive for a particular people, right? Jewish philosophy. Now, there has been a view that the Jews are not inherently given to philosophy. We have flourished as philosophers only when we've been intimate with our larger society in Alexandrian Greece, in 19th century Germany, and so on. Well, I mean, one could make the case. Look at Maimonides was a good example. of being expert in non-Jewish philosophy, Muslim philosophy, Greek philosophy. And what did he do? He brought it home to write the Guide for the Perplexed and the first book of the Mishnah Torah and so on. So being a part of a larger society can be dangerous, but it can also be extremely productive for a people. I don't know here. Let's go on a little bit. Oh my goodness gracious. All right, let's recognize just briefly that there is more here. So, verse 1 of chapter 4. So, but Moses spoke up and said, what if they don't believe me? In other words, this is the third question. Who am I? I will be with you. Who are you? I will be what I will be. I will be with you. Who are the people? In other words, Moses is very systematic in his expression of how daunting a task you're asking me to undertake is. It's a great exposition of the problems of being a prophet. You're speaking for God. Who is God? You've got to get up in the morning and say, I'm a prophet. I can't read the paper until noon. I got to get going here. Am I up to it? And I'm going to the people. Will they be receptive? Or are they going to constantly assault me? What if they don't believe me and don't listen to me, but say the Lord didn't appear to you? Yeah. Prove that he appeared. Well, to prove that he appeared, God has to enter the physical world, and in some way physical. You can't prove appearance unless you appeal to the senses. A non-physical God doesn't and can't appeal to the senses without ceasing to be God. Oh, I put that too strongly. God can appeal to the senses, but can't be sensuous God's self. That's not adequate either, but let's go on. The Lord said to him, what is in your hand? And he replied, a rod. And he said, cast it to the ground. Cast it on the ground. It became a snake, and Moses recoiled from it. The Lord said, put out your hand and grasp it at the tail. Put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, did appear to you. Okay? What kind of response is this? Who are the people? Here's my answer. Vulnerable to tricks. Because we know that the Egyptians can do the same thing when Moses goes to the Egyptians. So tricks can be understood as well as miracles, things that may violate the natural order. Like serpents that, what do? They become stiff, they become a rod. And I want to suggest to you, it's something for us to watch, that the Bible is very suspicious about the role of miracles, the role of tricks, which once the trick is over and a little time has elapsed, doesn't have any staying power anymore. What needs to happen is some internalization of the commitment and not be subject to Houdini, who is able to beguile the senses, okay? So this is really something of a critique, a criticism of the people who are too easily persuaded. And if you can persuade them by your trick, they can be persuaded by somebody else's trick. The whole point is to try to internalize it so that it's there. So the Lord said further, put your hand into your bosom. And he put his hand in his bosom. He took it out. His hand was encrusted with snowflakes. And he said, put your hand back in his bosom. He took it out there again like the rest. And if they don't believe you or pay heed to the first sign, they'll believe the second. Oh, is that true? I think God is laughing when God says that. If trick one doesn't work, trick two will. But what makes us so clear that trick two will do the trick? If two doesn't work, there's three. So if 99th trick doesn't work, there's 100th trick. Once you get started down that road, what makes you think that any trick is going to do the job? And if they're not convinced by both of these signs, verse 9, and do not heed you, take some water from the Nile, pour it on dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will turn to blood on dry ground. Okay. So I think who are the people raises a real problem for the prophets. They're gullible, and it's going to be hard to herd them. Let's just suppose wildly that Moses is going to have to take them 40 years through the wilderness. I mean, think about what Moses is up against with the people who are gullible, they vacillate, they don't stick with the project. Remember, they say at the first challenge, we'd like to go back to Egypt. Take us back to Egypt, the so-called counter-revolutionary force. We'd rather be slaves and have a plate full of cucumbers than be free. So Moses is up against it here, right? So let's just do verse 10 and then we'll stop. So that's number 3. Who am I? Who are you? Who are the people? But Moses said to the Lord, and see, Moses, what's Moses' stance at this point? I've tried to get out of it the first time. Who am I? I'm not up to it. Call somebody else. That didn't work. Who are you? I challenge you to make your identity clear. To which God said, yeah, I need to make it clear, but also unclear in its clarity. That didn't work. Moses accepted that. Who are the people? The people, God has to admit, are not going to be easily led. Please let me out of this. And God doesn't. Now, one more desperate act here. But Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. I have a speech impediment. What kind of a rhetorician, somebody who needs to persuade the people, am I going to be because I don't speak very well? By the way, nobody's more valuable in the next books of the Bible than Moses. But he's trying this out, okay? And the Lord said to them, him who gives man speech, who makes him dumb or deaf? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I'll be with you as you speak, and will instruct you what to say. But he said, I'll be with you, I'll be with your mouth, I'll make it okay, you'll be intelligible, you'll be understandable. Yeah, but please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. The Lord became angry with Moses, and he said, there's your brother Aaron the Levite, he I know, speaks readily. Even now he is setting out to meet you and will be happy to see you. You're not on your own. I've already anticipated your reluctance. I know you don't think you're a good speaker. I've already sent Aaron on his way. He's coming. It's in the mail, and you can't stop it. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with you and with him as you speak to tell both of you what to do. He shall speak for you to the people. Thus you serve as your spokesman, with you playing the role of God to him. This is very clever, isn't it? I'm God to you. I give you the word. You will give the word to Aaron, and he will find the right language. And we see at the golden calf incident, Aaron is pretty capable of doing that. He puts the people off. And take with you this rod which you shall perform, with which you shall perform the signs. And so the author has cleverly gotten Aaron now into the picture as an assistant to Moses, okay? Prophet and priest. And now we have those two basic offices which we need to look further at. Of course, Moses and Aaron are at each other's throats from time to time because these are two different ways of leading a people. But Moses' reluctance and the way in which he elaborates on it is so clever, I think, because he really does identify and bring to light all the ways in which the prophet is up against it. And there's no wonder that Isaiah says, I'm going to just read Isaiah chapter 6. This is Isaiah's calling in chapter 6. Let's see if I can do it. The year that King Uzziah died, I beheld my Lord seated high on a lofty throne. See, Isaiah is a person of the temple. He's a temple person. And the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. The 2 he covered with his face, the 2 he covered his legs, with 2 he would fly. It's right there in the ritual. And one called to the other, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Moloch al haaretz kavodo, which we say all the time. Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts, his presence fills all the earth. The doorpost would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house kept filling with smoke. I, Isaiah, cried, woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips. That's the basic organ of prophecy, speaking. And how can I speak God's word? I'm a person of unclean lips, prophetic humility. Or we might put it negatively, don't call me, please. And I live among a people of unclean lips. Those are 2 of Moses' concerns. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew over to me with a live coal, which he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched it to my lips and declared, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt shall depart and your sin be purged away. Your reluctance to be called by God has now been resolved by the consecration of your mouth as a vehicle serving God. It's really an amazing moment. This is the call of Isaiah from the temple. Then I heard the voice of my Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And he said, here I am, send me. That's an amazing moment. 2 seconds ago, I'm a man of unclean lips. His mouth was consecrated, and now he's ready to go. And he says those magic words, Hineni, here I am, Shlacheni, send me. Shaliach, a shaliach is an emissary, one who is sent. And he said, go say to the people, and now this is God's commissioning of what Isaiah is supposed to say. Hear indeed, but do not understand. See indeed, but don't grasp. Go to the people and say, you think you understand, you don't. You think you see it correctly, you don't. So Isaiah is going to be up against it. The people aren't going to listen to him. Dull that people's mind. What a mission. Dull their mind. Stop its ears, seal its eyes, lest seeing with its eyes and hearing with its ears, it also grasp with its mind and repent and save itself. This is a tough commission. Be sure the people don't get it, because if they do get it and confess their sins, they will be saved. They will atone, and I will accept it. Now, I think what Isaiah is getting at, I don't want to be too glib about it, is the time is not yet ripe for atonement. Things have gotten so bad that we have to now allow this negativity in the people play itself out so that they can be adequately punished and then atone and be reconciled with me. I sense that's what Isaiah is saying, but I'm not sure. It's an astonishing echo of the whole Moses thing, isn't it? Prophetic reluctance, and God keeps insisting, no, you're my person, and here's what I want you to do. Scott?
This is a question, it's probably a good one to save for next week, because if you opened up a can of worms a little earlier when you talk about God noticing or assuming the gullibility of the people, they would fall for these tricks / miracles. Okay, so if that's really the case, now was it tongue in cheek, like, oh, those guys, yeah, we can fool them? Or was it an assumption that may or may not have been correct, because later they're ignoring those miracles and reversing course would, led to them being called stiff-necked?
Yes.
Did he underestimate them, that they aren't so gullible, that they're fickle, or they're gullible and they're fickle as well?
Look, I think here's how I put it. What is the half-life of a miracle? How long does it last? You know, I've often asked myself about some of these television preachers, whom I watch from time to time, and I'm intrigued by them. They're very skilled in a lot of ways. But when they ask a person to come down, remember, what was his name? Eugene Ainsley? Ernest Ainsley. I like that guy, actually. But he would bring them down, and he would touch their forehead and zap them, and they said, how long does that being saved last?
You know, he was arrested in Germany for practicing medicine without a license.
Oh, dear.
Because of those miracles.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I think the Bible is very skeptical about how long so-called miracles last. And as this text moves on, miracles become fewer and fewer, because I think the Bible recognizes these things. And so I think it recognizes that that's not what it takes to convince people. What you need to do, and I think this is the Bible's idea, is to create a polity, a society built on law and institutions and values which transcend what the people might do tomorrow, gives them a sense of structure, a sense of purpose, a sense of value. Of course, being the people, and we're all the people, we resist being ordered by something, and we question the laws from time to time. But I think that's what it is. Replace the miracles, which really don't have lasting effect, with institutions that are likely to endure.
Well, that supports your idea of, or not your idea, but in Isaiah, the period of atonement.
Right.
So this is going to stick better than a show.
Right. I think